Cheshire's Chief Constable has told Sky News parents are to blame for teenage drinking. Peter Fahy also defended his plans for the legal drinking age to be raised from 18 to 21 to help combat antisocial behaviour, despite the government rejecting his cause. Well, more on that story now. We can talk to two guests who've got a point of view. Who's to blame for underage drinking and antisocial behaviour? Is it the responsibility of parents, or should drinks companies be more conscientious? Well, I'm joined now by MP Keith Vaz, who sits on the Home Affairs Select Committee, and Paul Chase, who's from the Confederation of Professional Licensees. Gentlemen, a good afternoon to both of you. Keith Vaz, your take on this. The government doesn't seem particularly keen on the idea of raising the drinking age.
Well, I agree. I think it would be wrong to raise it just now for this particular purpose, but I agree wholeheartedly with the comments that were made by the Chief Constable of Cheshire that started off the current debate, that it is extremely important that we look at the causes of underage drinking, that we look at the various stakeholders involved in that process, not just the kids themselves, but also the drinks industry, those who are responsible for licensed premises where the drinks get sold, obviously parents as well, because they're very much part of the partnership that ought to be struck between the various stakeholders to make sure that this kind of antisocial behaviour doesn't persist. I'm not in favour of changing the law, because I don't think just by passing an Act of Parliament you're going to suddenly make sure that people's behaviour alters overnight and dramatically. What we do need to do, however, is to take this issue very seriously. And those who have a major responsibility, that is the drinks industry, ought to understand that this is going on because of the availability of alcohol, partly because of changes in the law a few years ago. We really need to deal with it.
OK, well, let's talk about availability then. Paul Chase, from the licensee's position, we know that very often it's easy for people to carp about the role played by licensees. But do you think this is a helpful intervention by the Chief Constable in Cheshire?
Well, I think the Chief Constable has some very legitimate concerns, and police officers often having to deal with these issues on the street. But I don't think it's helpful to call for the minimum age of purchase to be raised to 21. I think if you move the line in the sand in this way, all you will do is ensure that there are more people who will want to cross it. And if the problem that we're talking about here is underage youths consuming alcohol, hanging around on street corners, making this change would be the way to boost their numbers. I don't think that's a helpful intervention at all. I think on the broader question of the responsibility of the industry, Keith Vaz is right. The industry has a responsibility, along with many other people. And test purchases have been going on for a number of years now. In 2004, there was a failure rate of test purchasing for underage sales of 50%. That fell last year to 20%. And the recent test purchasing campaign, the figures haven't been published yet.
Sorry, we're getting into sort of jargon here slightly, aren't we? Test purchases, are we saying that now, if we test an off-licence by sending somebody in who's clearly underage, 1 out of 5 times they'll actually be able to buy booze? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that the rate of failing those test purchases has fallen from 50% to 20%. And I understand the latest figures, when they're published, will show a further fall. So there is more work to be done, but the industry is making strides in addressing the issue and is reducing the size of the problem.
Well, let's put that to Keith Vaz. Does that ring true to you, Keith Vaz, in your Leicester constituency there? Anecdotally, at least, are your constituents telling you that that's reflected, stories of people buying booze in off-licences, late-night stores? 1 in 5, 20%? Do you think it's higher?
It's not reflected in the information that I have received from constituents who constantly complain about antisocial behaviour, and specifically in relation to young people. Paul is right. It cannot just be done by one of the stakeholders. It's got to be done in partnership. But of course, the problem does necessarily start with the people who make these drinks, because they make them available because they want to make profits and they want to sell these drinks. They're not doing it as a charitable venture. They're doing it because they want to make profits. And I think that having identified the fact that it is produced, all the stakeholders need to be involved. And I think we do need to engage with the industry. I think the Chief Constable is entitled to his opinion. As I've said, I don't agree that the age should be increased, But I think even Parliament has a responsibility in all this. We, after all, passed the Licensing Act of 2003 that made drink much more available to people, basically on a 24-hour basis if they choose to buy it as such. And therefore I think it's time to review the licensing law, and it's pertinent to do it now after 3 years, to make sure that it is in keeping with what we want to proceed with.
We're running short on time. Paul Chase was just shaking his head. Tell us why.
Well, I don't think the problem starts with the alcohol industry. I think the problem starts with the fact that we live in a fractured society, and we need to recognise that the problems of alcohol-fuelled misbehaviour by young people are engaged in by a minority of young people, often from circumstances which are much less well appointed than those that myself or Keith come from. And what we have to do is to work, the industry has to work with other stakeholders, and Keith is right about that. But the problem starts with the behaviour of the young people who are engaging in antisocial behaviour. And what I would support would be a new offence to make it illegal for young persons under the age of 18 to possess alcohol or to use it in a public place.
Okay,
that currently isn't an offence.
Paul Chase, we have to leave it there. Paul Chase and Keith Vaz. Gentlemen, thank you both.